The story of El Vaquero begins in the 16th century, before the Spanish colonization of Mexico. Native people of the Americas were roaming and farming the rich wild lands of northern Mexico, while in Spain, deep recession and the possibility of exploiting great opportunities in a new world prompted a crusade to explore and conquer the Americas.
Spain was practically bankrupt when it started its expeditions into Mexico and South America. They were not at that time interested in colonization. They needed gold and silver.
The Spanish horsemen who had expelled the Moors from Spain would now ride to another conquest in the New World. The conquistadors traveled into the unknown future solely upon their faith in God and their king.
As we approach the shores of the New World, I feel that our destiny is one of boundless wealth. For the riches that await us, I would give my life in eternal bliss. For my Lord, King and country, I will conquer the treasures of New Spain.
The Spanish conquest would profoundly change the state of global economics, ethnicity, and the face of history forever. Spain's military success was soon followed by thriving trade and industry. New fortunes and opportunities were created. Off the coast of Veracruz, Mexico, Spanish culture and commerce was transported from ships of the Armada fleet. By 1580, plans were developed to colonize the region of the new Spanish frontier known as Nueva Vizcaya. As New Spain pushed northward into the Sonora territory, the conquistadors encountered new cultures and religions.
The principal tribes in pre-European Sonora were the Pima, Opata, Yaqui, Mayo, and Seri. Except for the Seri, the members of all these tribes spoke languages that belonged to a very large linguistic family, which had representatives stretching all the way from Idaho to Central America.
The northern Indians would bow to no one and were not accustomed to answering a call for forced labor like those of central Mexico. Further, they did not live in large population centers which might facilitate easy conquest.
On the outland frontier, ethnic conflict grew out of human greed and miscommunication. Through manifest destiny and social seduction, the Spanish aristocracy was able to control land ownership and force slave labor from the native populace. With the establishment of mining communities, Spanish and native missions, and military garrisons known as presidios, ranching soon followed out of the necessity to feed the new populace. As the ranching enterprise grew, so did the demand for ranch workers. The needed labor force of farmers and vaqueros emerged from among some of the indigenous Native American cultures.
There were persons of pure Indian descent who were of three types: Mission Indians, such as the Opata, non-mission Indians, such as the Apaches, and Christianized Indians who lived away from their traditional villages. The Christianized Indians included people from different tribes who worked on ranches and in mining camps.
The Spaniards encountered many mixtures of people, such as the mulattoes and mestizos, with differing combinations of European, African, and Native American ancestry. The Spaniards held dominion over these people and over the land they worked. The lore of the vaquero developed under these situations of social duress. During the early 17th century, the king gave grants of land to the Spanish-Mexican elite. Many of these grants came to be known as haciendas, and their owners as hacendados.
The Spanish land grants were of various sizes and were made for a variety of purposes. Most, however, went to individuals from prominent families, usually members of the lesser nobility. The land grants ranged in extent from perhaps 4,000 to as many as 100,000 acres.
The hacendado was the patriarch. He was the godfather of the workers' children, and not infrequently, the father. The hacendados and their sons rarely performed any work. They led a life of idleness with little or no discipline. To pass the time, they engaged in a great deal of lovemaking, riding, gaming, cockfighting, horse racing, dancing, and drinking.
The hacendado became the feudal lord of Spanish-Mexican rural culture. Land ownership was available only to elite families well into the 20th century. Gradually, Mexico was being divided into two social classes, the wealthy and the poor. The hacendado dominated economic life, while the Vaquero and his family remained captive to a socio-political system of indulgence and tyranny. As vaqueros labored throughout the haciendas of Mexico, they also found work in the missions of New Spain. In these missions, whose churches were of Moorish, Byzantine, and Mexican Renaissance design, the neophyte could find asylum and work in alliance with the Order of Christ. Missionaries Padre Daniel Angelo Maros and Padre Eusebio Francisco Quino were two of the Jesuit priests who helped establish missions throughout the frontier of Sonora and Arizona. These holy men earned the confidence and trust of the peaceful native population as they created productive agricultural and livestock enterprises. The native men were taught agrarian and equestrian skills. Because of their great desire and stamina, the natives made excellent horsemen. Their new role as master of the horse brought them prosperity and a new identity. The missionaries, Opata and Yaqui natives, developed an alliance through their work and continuous struggle against the Apaches to the northeast. Christianized natives and Spaniards had joined together for survival, leading to intermarriage and assimilation. Despite what the missionaries had accomplished, Jesuit occupation of the frontier had strong opposition.
In 1767, the King of Spain closed the Jesuit missions and barred members of that order from further work in the Spanish Empire. The following year, Franciscan priests were called to continue missionary work in Sonora, especially in the Indian towns of the Northwest.
Through political upheaval and social adversity, the relationship between the Spanish and Native Americans progressed. Together, they would alter the future of Sonora. During the 19th and early 20th century, the cattle industry in northern Mexico was thriving. The vaquero continued to be abused and exploited. Their incomes were at poverty levels, and strikes were prohibited.
By 1900, northern Mexico's cattle business had attained major importance in the national economy. The haciendas that had developed over a span of nearly 4 centuries annually produced hundreds of thousands of cattle that were sold in Mexico as well as in the United States.
Mexico at this time went through a series of shifts between a highly centralized political system and one in which power was shared by the central and regional governments. Contention between factions supporting each point of view amounted to civil anarchy. The state of Sonora was badly torn by this strife.
Still not satisfied with the amount of land they possessed, many wealthy hacendados seized the land of others, particularly the rich territory of the Yaqui and Mayo natives. Government policies allowed these atrocities to occur as Mexico had become a police state with a dictator in power. His name was General Porfirio Diaz, and he ruled Mexico with club and iron fist. General Diaz made Mexico a colony of foreign capitalism. Land, mining, railroads, and public utilities were now controlled by wealthy North Americans and British aristocrats. Diaz gave away nearly 1/5 of the Republic of Mexico. Although he was technically a free man, the vaquero became captive of the debt peonage system during the administration of President Diaz. Under this system, the vaquero and his family worked and lived on his employer's ranch, earning a very minimal wage. He was obliged to purchase necessities from the hacienda store on credit, but his wages could never cover his debt, and he could never leave for another job. If he tried, he was hunted down by the federal rural police and jailed. Thus, the workers were held virtual captives of their employers. The smaller ranch owners, known as rancheros, were also oppressed by the Diaz system. They had to compete with the hacendados, who paid fewer taxes, had bank credit, and were subsidized by debt-bound peon labor. At the turn of the 20th century, the masses of underprivileged could tolerate no more. Expropriation of land and enslavement of native people had thrust Mexico into a state of turmoil. An organized revolt against the existing order was started by Francisco Madero. He promised to return land taken from its rightful owners and addressed issues concerning the workers of Mexico. Rancheros, vaqueros, and peons joined forces with him. The Mexican Revolution became a bloody civil war, lasting more than 10 years, killing hundreds of thousands of people and destroying Mexico's frail infrastructure and economic stability. After the flames of revolution subsided, Mexican presidents Álvaro Obregón, Plutarco Elias Calles, and Lázaro Cárdenas built new schools and carried out social reform programs.
Following the revolution, large landholdings were slow to break up. Smaller farms in Sonora were broken up in 20 and 30-acre parcels, which barely afforded the new owners with a living.
Land stripped from the vanquished hacendados was reorganized under a communal system known as the ejido. As members of the ejidos, many employed and unemployed workers came to possess substantial numbers of cattle and horses. There was new hope for the common man to become self-sufficient and defeat the scourge of poverty. At last, Mexico was to be for the Mexicans. However, the revolution and the ejido redistribution of land was an empty promise for the common man. In the end, it had failed to fulfill the dream of owning land. The vaqueros returned to work, despite their misfortune.
Following the war, many vaqueros felt disillusioned on the realization that the revolution to which they had contributed so much, in return, gave them so little.
Since 1924, the Republic of Mexico has sought a healthy economic solution to the problem of land ownership and distribution. Government administrations have favored different proposals, private, public, and communal, none of which has been completely satisfactory.
Large ranches still exist in Sonora, but currently the government does not expropriate land for redistribution. Even the ejido system is currently being dismantled as an experiment that did not work.
The most significant concession from the federal government to ranchers concerning land reform occurred in 1973. A new law laid to rest most of the concerns large ranch owners had about expropriation of their property. It also encouraged the ranchers to invest in ranch improvements, and so they did. Some enlightened ranchers are now providing profit-sharing plans in addition to government-set wages as an incentive to better care for livestock and to reinforce vaquero loyalty and dependability. Despite all this, vaquero responsibility and cattle work are much the same as they have been for centuries. Even a much improved ranch cannot escape this reality. Here in the San Bernardino area, within the Paria and San Luis Mountains of northeastern Sonora, Mexico, the states of Sonora, Chihuahua, Arizona, and New Mexico are joined, sharing not only borders, but significant aspects of Native American, Mexican, and North American history and culture. Within this region, richly documented in the traditions and attitudes of Mexican ranching, is El Rancho Gallardo, a 24,000-acre cattle ranch. It is home to the ideals, customs, and lifestyle of its journeyman, El Vaquero. The ranch house of Gallardo is rustic in form. Its century-old frame is fired and molded from adobe, rock, and mud. The 26-inch thick exterior walls are coated and preserved with stucco made from limestone. This borderland house, secluded in the Sonoran landscape, is an architectural remnant of colonial Mexican and territorial Arizona styles. Alfonso Elias Ruiz, a seventh-generation Mexican, is the third generation of his family to own Rancho Gallardo. Manuel Elias Perez, his great-grandfather, was the first to own the ranch.
My dad came from Spain. My mom was from Tecoripa. And my dad met my mom. They started romancing and got married. Then my mom and dad lived in Fronteras. In those years, I had another uncle named Manuel Elias who died very young. And Beatriz, my uncle's wife, sold my dad the ranch. And that's how we came to own the Rancho Gallardo.
At the age of 79, Senor Ruiz works vigorously to maintain his ranch. He and his hired help are living the Vaquero legacy as they work out their tenure. Don Chico Tellez, Julio Castillo, and Ramon Lopez are among the current generation of vaqueros who have journeyed a different road to live and work on El Rancho Gallardo.
I like the country. I like to roam. Anyway, you get used to the vaqueriada, the cowboy life, and you adjust to the country. If you learn how to budget, you can live anywhere. But to live a happier life, only on a ranch. Here there is plenty of battle. The land is so vast. When you gather cattle, you bring this animal, then go for another. You can't be gathering one by one. They all scatter about. It's a real struggle.
On Rancho Gallardo, each day is a challenge for the vaqueros' resourcefulness, determination, and adaptability. From the haciendas of historic Mexico to the ranchos of Sonora today. In ranching, success or failure has always been determined by the whimsical and unpredictable cattle market.
Pues la sequía del año pasado estuvo muy mala, muy mala.
Last year's drought was really bad. About 100 calves died. And if I hadn't bought more feed, more would have died. I spent about $30,000 to $40,000 just to save the herd.
$40,000 de comida.
Este año que pasó, pues fue poco malo.
This past year was, well, kind of bad because the waters did not come. It didn't rain. For the cowboy, it's always the same, but for the owner, it's different. He has more problems. He has to buy more hay, and for him, it's more expensive.
En la que tuve que entregar yo vendí.
In my last delivery, I had to sell about 300 cows in the market because they were malnourished and were going to die. And then I lost 100 more. So in total, I had to get rid of about 400 cows from my ranch. And this year is going bad as well. There's been little rain, so the land is bad.
For Senor Ruiz and his foreman, Don Chico Tellez, the management and upkeep of stock and range is never ending. The range must be seen several times a month, which is still done on horseback.
La cosa del vaquero, sea para ser uno vaquero.
The thing about being a cowboy is that it has to come naturally. This is why you must have grace, your talent. You are always learning. I once worked for a boss who expected me to be a veterinarian. I had to give intravenous injections, like in the neck, in the aorta. Well, it's very hard sometimes because one does not always know. You have to inherit this talent. If you really like it, then you'll learn it.
For ranching, as always, the essence of success is healthy livestock. For the vaquero, the essence of his work is the care of that livestock. To safeguard stock within their boundaries, El Vaquero must secure and maintain fences that surround the ranch and divide its various pastures. When any of these fences are damaged or need to be moved, he will mend lengths of fence by hand, replacing mesquite posts and stringing barbed wire as needed. The passing seasons bring on new challenges and obligations. While there is work on the range, there is also work on the home front. All ranch work is accounted for, and for each endeavor there is a result. El Vaquero tends the ranch garden and each year strings the crop of red chile. The strands are known as sartas or ristras. A bountiful crop is the reward of a job well done. A virtue of rural ingenuity can be seen in the vaquero's creativity. You make do with what you have. Alfalfa, raisins, and maize must be ground into a high-caloric forage for the calves. Because there is no motor for the feed grinder, an alternative method is employed. This is classic vaqueroism. Working around the problem using available resources to complete the work. The ranch house is a haven where vaqueros rest, talk of assignments and cattle business, and tell stories of old and new.
Here in San Juan, a place they call Quinta Chilla, we had a herd of about 800 head. And we were up late when about midnight the herd got spooked, and it was worse than hearing the sound of a truck, like a buzzing sound. The herd was so wild that it started to run around toward the open range. Some of us that already knew about stampedes went to get some pails and started to bang them together. Stop, we made such a ruckus. The herd came back.
Family superstitions and vaquero lore are passed by tongue and gesture. For the moment, El Rancho is at peace. He is a man of the Americas, uniquely American and definitively Mexican. His language, religion, and craft are diverse composites of his evolution and history. Humble and simple, he lives and works among these immense valleys and rugged sierras. His hardened face and hands reflect his very being. His clothing and saddle trappings may be his only possessions. The legend of El Vaquero can be exaggerated as colorful and daring, and it often is. But reality for the horsemen of past and present is often shaped by tragedy.
Well, my dad was on the ground, and I passed by the house running and said, "I'll be right back. I am going to get my horse." And so I went, and then I came back, and I saw him still on the ground by the horse's feet. And I asked, "What happened, Dad?" He said, "I fell down, but actually he had a stroke." So I picked him up, and I was scared, for I've always heard that a man that is never ill, the day he gets sick, it's the day he dies. And that's what happened.
I had two brothers, and both were killed by horses. Ramon and Güero too. Now my sons tell me not to work with horses because it is dangerous and all that, but I am used to it. After all these years, can you imagine to leave it just like that? No, I can't.